The rain hammered against the windows of a roadside diner, its neon sign flickering and buzzing like it was fighting for life. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, some dim, some stuttering, casting a tired pallor over the cracked tiles and chipped tables. Customers murmured low conversations, forks clinking against worn plates, while the old jukebox in the corner sputtered out half a tune. A man in a faded navy cap slipped through the door, a cardboard box balanced in his arms. His jacket bore the logo of a delivery service. His jeans looked worn, and his face was shadowed by the brim of his cap. He set the box carefully on the counter and gave a polite nod to the waitress without lingering. To anyone watching, he was just another delivery guy working another forgettable night. But the truth was far from ordinary. This man wasn't a delivery driver. His name was David, and he owned the diner. David had built his restaurant chain from the ground up, but lately, troubling reports had landed on his desk. Complaint from customers, stories of staff being mistreated, and a slow decline in profits. Paperwork and numbers never told the full story. So, David came here in disguise, determined to see for himself what was happening inside one of his own establishments. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Melissa, a sharp voice sliced across the room. Table 6 has been waiting 10 minutes. Move it. The voice belonged to the manager, Brenda. She was in her late 30s, her blonde hair pulled tight, her blouse pressed stiffly. She had the posture of someone who wanted the world to know she was in charge, and the coldness of someone who thought kindness was weakness. She slammed a ticket onto the kitchen counter, where Mark, the weary cook, stirred a pot of stew. "I've got 3 orders ahead of it," Mark said quietly, trying to keep the frustration from his tone. Brenda leaned close, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Then maybe you should work faster. Or maybe I'll find someone who can." Melissa, the curly-haired waitress Brenda had barked at, dropped her gaze and rushed to refill coffee cups. She didn't argue. Nobody did. The customers got fake smiles, but the staff got knives in the ribs. As the night dragged on, David saw more. A young cook named Anthony burned his hand on the grill, hissing quietly in pain. Brenda barely glanced at him before snapping, "Don't slow down. Customers are waiting." In the back, a dishwasher was scolded for taking too long, even though the machine leaked water across the floor, forcing him to work twice as hard. And when the servers pulled their tips at the end of each rush, David noticed Brenda sweeping them into a jar and carrying them into her office. "For the house," she muttered, but her eyes betrayed the greed. The staff didn't protest. They were too beaten down, too tired. One worker stood out. Her name was Emily. She was 28, her dark hair pulled back, her apron tied snug around her waist. There were faint shadows under her eyes, but her smile, though weary, was genuine. She cracked a joke with a trucker slouched at the counter, handed extra napkins to a young mother struggling with a messy toddler, and quietly slipped a slice of pie to a teenager who looked like she hadn't eaten all day. Emily didn't have much, but she gave what she could. Later that night, David overheard her speaking softly to Melissa. "Another double shift?" Melissa asked. Emily nodded, rubbing her wrist. "Rent's due. I'll sleep when I can." Melissa sighed. "You deserve better. You know that." Emily just shrugged. "Better doesn't keep the lights on." David felt something twist in his chest. He had read numbers on spreadsheets, but none of them told him this. None of them told him about Emily. As the storm outside worsened, the atmosphere inside grew heavier. Brenda's temper flared hotter with every passing hour. She snapped at Anthony for being slow, though he was covering for Mark, who was doubled over coughing in the back. She barked at Melissa for not scrubbing floors hard enough after her shift should have ended. And then, she turned her fury on Emily. A customer complained about cold soup. Brenda didn't check the order slip, didn't glance at the kitchen. She stormed straight toward Emily, her heels clacking against the greasy floor. "Did you seriously serve this?" Brenda hissed, holding up the bowl. "Do you have any idea how much you're costing us?" Emily's voice trembled. I just picked it up from the window." Brenda didn't let her finish. She slammed the bowl down on the counter, broth splattering across Emily's apron. "You're useless," she spat. "If you weren't so desperate for scraps, I'd have fired you already." The diner went silent. Emily stood frozen, her uniform stained, her eyes glistening with humiliation. And that was it. David couldn't stay quiet any longer. He rose slowly from his stool at the counter. The delivery cap came off, and for the first time that night, his eyes met Brenda's without the shadow of disguise. "You've said enough." Brenda blinked. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are?" David's voice was calm but iron-edged. "I'm the one who built this place. I'm the one who signs your paychecks. And tonight, I've watched everything." Brenda's face drained of color. Around the diner, employees froze in disbelief. Emily's lips parted. "You're the owner," she whispered. David nodded, his gaze locked on Brenda. "Yes, and I've seen exactly how you treat people when you think no one's watching." Brenda stammered. "Yes, sir. I was just keeping discipline. These workers need firm guidance." David stepped closer, his voice low and thundering. "That wasn't discipline. That was cruelty, theft, exploitation. You don't lead with fear. You don't steal the tips your staff earn. And you never, ever humiliate people who give you everything they've got." The room was silent except for the rain against the windows. David turned to the staff. "You deserve better. All of you." Emily's shoulders shook. For the first time all night, her mask cracked and tears rolled down her face. "I thought no one cared," she whispered. David's voice softened. "I care, and I'm going to prove it." That night, Brenda was escorted out, her angry protest swallowed by the storm outside. The door swung shut, and for the first time in years, the staff stood together in something that felt like relief. David promised them change, fair wages, proper breaks, no more stolen tips, no more threats. Anthony exhaled like he had been holding his breath for years. Melissa whispered a thank you, covering her mouth with shaking hands. Mark leaned against the counter, his tired face breaking into a slow smile. And Emily stood at the center, tears on her cheeks, whispering, "Maybe things really can be different." Leadership isn't about power. It isn't about control. True leadership means standing where the burden is heaviest and lifting it. In a world where cruelty often hides behind authority, real strength is found in empathy. But the story wasn't finished. As David looked out the rain-streaked window, his phone buzzed. He read the text, his jaw tightening. It was from the corporate office. "Board meeting tomorrow. Urgent. We need to discuss the complaints and your leadership." David slipped the phone back into his pocket. Outside, thunder cracked, and the storm raged harder. This battle was only beginning. The words felt less like a warning and more like a summons to battle. Because David knew one thing. If corruption had poisoned a single diner, there was a chance it had seeped much higher into the very heart of the company he had built. The next morning, the world looked different. The sun broke through the clouds, but the tension in David's chest didn't ease. He traded the delivery jacket for a press suit. But when he looked at himself in the mirror, he felt the same question gnawing. How much of the truth have I been blind to? By noon, he was walking through the glass doors of corporate headquarters. The air smelled faintly of polished marble and expensive coffee, the lobby echoing with the tap of designer shoes on tile. Employees moved briskly, eyes fixed forward, rehearsed smiles plastered on their faces. It was a different world from the diner, but David knew appearances could be deceiving. The boardroom was already full when he entered. 12 people sat around the long polished table, their suits sharp, their expressions sharper. At the head sat Richard, the chairman of the board, a man in his mid-50s with slick-back hair and round glasses that did nothing to soften his stern demeanor. "David," Richard said, his voice carrying a practiced blend of authority and disapproval. "Glad you could join us." David sat, his gaze scanning the table. He could feel the undercurrent, whispers, side glances, papers shuffled deliberately. The tension here wasn't about one diner. It was about power. Richard cleared his throat. "We received troubling reports, employee complaints, accusations of mismanagement, declining profits in several locations. And then there was last night, you showing up in disguise, interfering directly." Murmurs spread down the table. David leaned forward, his voice steady. "Last night I saw the truth. I saw a manager stealing tips, threatening staff, humiliating people who worked harder than she ever did. If that's happening at one diner, how many others are suffering while we sit here?" A woman across the table, Linda, a board member with sharp eyes and a thin smile, spoke up. With respect, David, that's not your role. You're supposed to lead from the top, not play dress-up with aprons and delivery caps. Another board member chuckled, the sound cold. David didn't flinch. Leadership means knowing what's happening on the ground. Numbers don't show the single mother pulling double shifts. They don't show the cook hiding an injury because he's afraid of losing his job. I saw them, and I won't ignore them. The room quieted. For a moment, David thought he had struck a chord. But then Richard leaned back, steepling his fingers. Passion is admirable, he said coolly, but profits pay the bills. If soft hands and sympathy slow production, then maybe tough management is what we need. David's jaw tightened. He knew this wouldn't be easy. After the meeting adjourned, Richard pulled David aside. His tone was lower, but sharper. You think you did something noble last night? You embarrassed this company. And if you push this crusade any further, you'll find the board isn't as forgiving as your diner staff. David met his gaze evenly. If you think I'll protect corruption, you've forgotten who built this company. Richard's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. We'll see how long you keep your throne. That evening, David returned to the diner. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain. Inside, things were different. Melissa and Anthony laughed quietly as they restocked supplies. Mark hummed softly in the kitchen, moving with an ease David hadn't seen the night before. Emily was wiping down tables, her hair falling loose from its tie. Her smile tired but real this time. When she saw David, she froze for a moment. Then she set the rag aside and walked over. I don't know what to say, she whispered. No one's ever stood up for us like that. David gave her a small smile. You don't need to say anything. Just keep doing what you've always done. People like you are the reason places like this matter. Her eyes glistened, but this time not from humiliation. This time from hope. But even as David looked around the diner, his mind was elsewhere. He knew the board wouldn't let this go. He knew Richard wasn't finished. And deep down, he feared the corruption ran far deeper than one greedy manager. The fight for his company's soul had only just begun. Injustice doesn't always scream from the shadows. It whispers in boardrooms, hides in contracts, and feeds off silence. David had lifted the veil on one corrupt manager, but as he looked toward the battle ahead, he realized the real enemy wasn't in a diner at all. It was sitting across from him in a room of suits, holding power like a knife. The camera would pan out on David, standing at the diner window, his reflection caught against the neon glow. His phone buzzed again. A new message, this time from an unknown number. Stop digging, or we'll bury you. David's hand tightened around the phone. The neon buzzed, the night stretched heavy, and the storm clouds gathered once more. He stood at the diner window, the neon buzzing faintly behind him, the rainwater still dripping from the eaves outside. His reflection stared back, tired eyes, furrowed brow, the weight of responsibility pressing deeper than ever. The first time he went undercover, he thought he'd found the rut, one corrupt manager, exposed and cast out. But this message told him something darker, something larger, was at play. Brenda hadn't been acting alone. Someone higher up was watching, and they weren't afraid to threaten him. The following morning, the air inside corporate headquarters was colder than usual. The walls of glass and polished steel reflected power, wealth, and control, but beneath the shine lurked unease. David walked the halls with his head high, but his mind replayed the text over and over. Was it Richard, the chairman, pulling the strings? Or Linda, the board member with that icy smile? Maybe someone else entirely, someone who stood to profit from the silence of broken employees. As he entered the boardroom, conversations hushed. Papers shuffled. Coffee cups were lifted as shields. Richard greeted him with the same calculated smile. David, glad you could make it. We've got important business today. Funny, David replied. I thought the business was making sure our people weren't being robbed blind. Murmurs rippled around the table. Richard's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. The meeting dragged into tense hours. Charts, graphs, and profit margins flashed on screens. Complaints were brushed off as isolated incidents. The board painted a picture of a company thriving, except David knew better. He had seen the exhaustion in Emily's eyes. He had seen Anthony burn his hand. He had seen Brenda pocket tips. Finally, Linda spoke. "David, with all due respect, your unorthodox methods are becoming a liability. Disguises, dramatic reveals in diners. What kind of message does that send shareholders? That we're unstable? That leadership is desperate?" Another member chimed in. "We need to project strength, not sympathy." Richard leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "That's why we prepared a vote." David stiffened. "A vote?" Richard nodded. "On whether you remain CEO." The silence that followed was deafening. David felt the noose tightening. They were moving against him, using his compassion as a weapon. His own board was turning the tables. But then, something caught his eye. A file folder sitting just at the edge of Linda's papers. It wasn't part of the day's agenda. It was stamped confidential. And in the moment she looked away, he saw just enough of the header to feel the blood drain from his face. Employee complaint suppression policy. Internal distribution only. His heart pounded. It was proof. Proof that the board wasn't just blind to mistreatment. They were orchestrating it. Complaints weren't reaching him because they were being buried. The vote began, voices cold and detached. I. Each word was another nail in the coffin. David's hand tightened around his pen until it snapped. "No," he said finally, his voice sharp as steel. "I won't let this happen. I built this company from the ground up, and I won't let greed gut its soul." Richard smirked. "Then perhaps the company will move on without you." That night, David worked late in his office, poring over records, digging for proof of the buried complaints. His lamp cast a small circle of light against the dark city skyline. The more he read, the more bile rose in his throat. Hundreds of complaints. Servers fired for asking about stolen tips. Cooks forced to work with no breaks. Single mothers threatened with termination if they refused extra shifts. All of it hidden, shredded, or redirected to legal black holes. And then, his computer screen flickered. Files disappeared, one after another. He reached for the mouse, but it was too late. His entire hard drive wiped clean before his eyes. A single message appeared in bold letters across the screen. "We warned you." The room felt colder. Someone wasn't just threatening him now. They were sabotaging him. The next day, David found himself back at the diner. Somehow, being around the people who lived the truth grounded him. Emily noticed his expression the moment he walked in. She set down a coffee cup and slid into the booth across from him. "You look worse than I do after double shift," she said softly. David let out a tired laugh. "That bad, huh?" She stuttered him. "What happened?" He hesitated, but something about her resilience, her raw honesty, made him speak. He told her about the vote, about the buried complaints, about the sabotage. Emily's eyes widened. They are trying to erase the truth. David nodded. "And if I don't act fast, they'll erase me too." For a long moment, Emily was silent. Then she leaned forward, her voice fierce. "Then don't let them. Fight back. Not just for you, for all of us." Her words lit a spark inside him. David knew he couldn't fight this war alone. The board controlled the files, the systems, the money, but they didn't control the people. So he began to gather stories. Quietly, carefully, he asked employees across multiple locations to share their truths. Some were afraid. Others were angry. Many were broken from years of silence. But once the first brave voices spoke, others followed. A single father forced to work 16-hour shifts without overtime. A teenage waitress denied tips because the manager claimed training fees. A veteran cook told to hide his injury because workers' comp costs too much. Each story was another crack in the facade the board had built. But David knew stories alone wouldn't win. He needed proof. He needed the confidential files Linda had tucked away. And to get them, he would have to step into enemy territory. It was nearly midnight when David returned to headquarters. The building loomed tall against the city skyline, its windows glowing faintly. His security badge gave him access, but he moved with caution. Every footstep echoed too loudly. He slipped into Linda's office, the scent of expensive perfume lingering faintly in the air. Her desk was immaculate, every pen aligned, every paper squared, except for the locked cabinet against the wall. David worked the lock with trembling hands. The click of it opening sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Inside were folders, dozens of them, stamped confidential. He pulled one at random. Complaint suppression policy, Region 4. His pulse quickened. This was it, the proof. But then, a voice. Well, look who's finally showing his true colors. David froze. Richard stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards. His smile was razor-sharp. Stealing file from your own company. Richard taunted. That'll look great in tomorrow's headlines. The guard stepped forward. David clutched the file to his chest, his mind racing. He had the truth in his hands, but now he was trapped. Injustice doesn't go quietly. When truth threatens power, power strikes back. David has uncovered the rot at the core of his company, but with enemies closing in, the cost of exposing it may be higher than he ever imagined. The camera would linger on David, back pressed against the wall of Linda's office, file in hand, guards closing in. Would he escape with the truth, or be silenced before it ever sees the light of day? David's pulse hammered in his ears as the 2 security guards closed in. The file, his only weapon, was clutched so tightly his knuckles whitened. Richard leaned against the doorway, calm and cruel, savoring the moment. "Put it down, David," Richard said smoothly. "You're only making this worse for yourself." David forced his voice steady. "Worse? For whom? The people you've been stealing from? The workers you've been burying under your policies?" Richard's smile widened. "No one cares, David. The board doesn't care. The press doesn't care. People want cheap food, not sob stories about dishwashers. You're outnumbered, outplayed, and soon out of a job." The guard stepped forward. David's options dwindled. Fight, flee, or fold. His eyes flicked to the window, 20 stories up. No escape there. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a sudden vibration like fate itself tapping his leg. Emily's text. "Whatever happens, don't let them silence you. We're with you." That spark returned. He wasn't alone. David threw the folder across the desk. Papers scattered in the air, a blizzard of suppressed complaints. The guards lunged. David ducked low, bolted through the side door, and ran. Alarm screamed to life. His feet pounded the marble floors, every echo a reminder he had seconds to disappear. By the time Richard reached the hallway, David was gone, files stuffed under his arm, a storm building in his chest. The following night, the city was restless with rain. David sat in a cramped apartment, laptop open, the stolen files spread across the table. Emily, Anthony, and Lisa had gathered around him. Their uniforms still smelled faintly of grease and coffee, but their eyes were bright with purpose. "Are you sure about this?" Anthony asked, glancing nervously at the glowing screen. "Once you send it out, there's no going back." David nodded. "They'll come after me. They'll come after all of us. But if we don't act now, they'll keep burying the truth." Lisa leaned in, fierce. "Then let's bury them instead." David uploaded the files to a secured channel, sending copies to investigative journalists, labor lawyers, and a whistleblower protection agency. With one keystroke, years of hidden corruption were released into the world. A message appeared on the screen. "Upload complete." David leaned back, exhaling. "It's out." Emily whispered, almost reverently. "Then the war's begun." By morning, the headlines blazed across every major outlet. Restaurant chain CEO suppresses worker complaints. Leaked files reveal years of exploitation. Whistleblowers speak out. Tips stolen, hours manipulated, voices silenced. News crews swarmed outside headquarters. Workers from dozens of locations staged walkouts, holding hand-painted signs that read, "We are not disposable and justice the servers." For the first time, the voices that had been buried were shouting loud enough for the world to hear. David sat in his car, parked a block away, listening to the coverage on the radio. His name was everywhere, some calling him a hero, others branding him a traitor. But one thing was certain, the ball could no longer operate in the shadows. Inside headquarters, Richard slammed his fist on the boardroom table. Find him. Discredit him. Destroy him. Linda adjusted her glasses, calm as ever. The files are already out. We can't erase them, but we can erase him. If we frame him as a leaker, the thief, the reckless CEO, the public will turn. Another board member added, we have friends in the media. We'll push the narrative. Unstable leader, going rogue, breaking laws. He'll be the story, not the workers. Richard smirked. Exactly. If he wants war, he'll get one. Within hours, counter-stories appeared. Disgraced CEO caught stealing company property. Unstable leader jeopardizes jobs. Shareholders furious. Talk shows painted David as a liability. Anonymous sources claimed he had personal issues clouding his judgment. Even allies began to waver. Anthony called in that night, voice shaking. David, the guys at work are scared. They are saying you're dragging us into something we can't win. Some of them think you betrayed us. David's stomach twisted. Richard had planted seeds of doubt, and they were already sprouting. 2 nights later, David arranged a secret meeting in an abandoned office building. He needed to rally his allies before the board tore them apart. Emily, Anthony, and Lisa arrived, but something felt off. Anthony avoided his gaze. His hands trembled. David frowned. What's going on? Anthony finally looked up, guilt written all over his face. I had to tell them. They threatened my family, David. Said they'd take away everything if I didn't cooperate. David's chest tightened. You told them where I was. Before Anthony could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Flashlights cut through the dark. Richard's voice rang out. Game over, David. David's allies scattered, but the net was closing. Anthony stood frozen, torn between regret and fear. David locked eyes with him for a split second. This isn't on you, he whispered. Then he bolted. The building became a maze of shadows and steel. David sprinted through empty offices, leaping over desks, ducking under broken ceiling tiles. Security guards thundered behind him. Every door seemed locked. Every hallway ended in dead ends. His lungs burned. Finally, he burst onto the rooftop, the city stretching out in lights below. Rain slicked the concrete. Helicopters buzzed in the distance, cameras already circling the spectacle. Richard emerged from the stairwell, flanked by guards. His suit was immaculate, his grin venomous. No place left to run, David. David's chest heaved. This isn't over. The truth is out. You can't bury it now. Richard stepped closer. Truth is just a story, and stories can be rewritten. The guards advanced, but then shouts echoed from below. Workers, hundreds of them, crowded the streets outside headquarters. They held signs, chanted slogans, their voices a thunderous wave rising through the night air. Richard froze, his smile faltering. David straightened, rain dripping from his hair, and shouted down to the crowd, You are the story, not them, not me, you. The roar of the crowd shook the rooftop. Cameras zoomed in. The narrative had shifted again, and this time, the board couldn't control it. Over the next week, the battle escalated. The board unleashed smear campaigns, fake audits, even hired private investigators to dig up dirt on David. But David and his allies struck back, leaking more files, emails, recordings, contracts signed in secret. Each leak exposed another layer of corruption. It became a war of attrition. Headlines flipped daily. Board exposed in kickback scheme. CEO under fire for unauthorized leaks. Whistleblower protections invoked amid corporate scandal. David barely slept. He moved from safe house to safe house, laptop always in hand, allies dwindling as fear set in. Yet he pressed forward, determined. But betrayal lingered in the shadows. Lisa, once fiery in her support, stopped answering calls. Then, one morning, a new headline appeared. Former employee claimed CEO exploited workers for his own agenda. The article quoted Lisa directly, painting David as manipulative, using staff as pawns in his vendetta. David stared at the screen in disbelief. Lisa, his ally, had sold him out. For the first time, David felt the weight of despair. Alone, hunted, betrayed. The walls were closing in. Then a knock at the safe house door. Emily's voice whispered, "It's me." David opened the door cautiously. She slipped inside, eyes fierce. "They are breaking you down, piece by piece," she said. "But they don't realize something. You've already won. People believe you. They've seen the truth. They can't unsee it." David sank into a chair, exhausted. Belief isn't enough. They control the money, the lawyers, the headlines. Emily placed a flash drive on the table. "Not anymore. I pulled this from the diner's back office. It's a recording of Brenda admitting she was told to suppress tips and shift reports. She names names, board names." David stared at the drive like it was a weapon. Maybe it was. "This," Emily whispered, "is a kill shot." The final scene would linger on David, holding the flash drive between trembling fingers. The city outside buzzed with chaos, media vans, protests, and corporate spin machines all colliding. Richard and the board were tightening their grip. Betrayal had cost him allies. His reputation was teetering on a knife's edge. But now, finally, he held something undeniable. Something that could topple everything. In the war between truth and power, the next move could decide it all. David has a weapon. But in a game of betrayal and espionage, even the strongest weapons can turn against their wielder. The wind howled through the skeletal frame of the skyscraper, rattling loose sheets of metal like drums of war. The floor was half-poured concrete, scaffolding rising into shadows above. David stood near the center, a laptop balanced on a steel beam, its screen casting a cold glow across his face. His coat whipped around him, rain from broken windows spattering his shoulders. He looked like a man at the edge, not just of the building, but of everything. Footsteps echoed. First Linda emerged, her silhouette sharp against the city light behind her. Her heels clicked across the concrete, precise, unhurried. She carried herself like someone who believed she owned the room. Then Richard appeared, flanked by two armed men in black suits. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. His grin, cruel and composed, said it all. "I am still in control." For a long moment, the three of them stood in a tense triangle. The city stretched below, glittering, unaware of the war being waged above its skyline. Richard broke the silence first, his voice smooth, practiced. "So this is what it comes to. A half-built floor and a laptop on a beam. After everything, David, this is your grand stage." David's jaw tightened. Sometimes the most unfinished places show the clearest truths. Linda smirked. "Poetic, but poetry doesn't win wars. Evidence does. And if you think either of us came here without our own, you've miscalculated." David gestured to the laptop. "That's exactly what tonight is about. No more whispers, no more shadows. You wanted me cornered, Richard. You wanted me divided, Linda. But tonight, you'll show your hands." The guard shifted, their guns glinting under the work lights. But Richard raised a hand, stopping them. He wanted the duel as much as David did. "David, Richard, offshore accounts in your name. Millions funneled through shell companies, stolen from the very workers you claim to protect shareholders from. You bled this company dry." Richard laughed softly, shaking his head. "Workers don't build empires. Leaders do. I didn't bleed the company. David, I fed it. And in return, I took my share. That's not theft. That's survival." Linda leaned against the beam, her eyes glinting. Spoken like a man who knows his empire is crumbling. "Tell me, Richard, how many allies do you really have left? Half the board whispers against you. The other half fears you. And fear, as we both know, is brittle." Richard turned his gaze on her, cold as steel. "And what about you, Linda? The double dealer, feeding scraps to David while cashing my checks. How long do you think you can balance on two sides before one pushes you off?" David's voice cut through. "That's what tonight is. The balancing ends. Masks off." The duel became verbal knives, each thrust sharper than the last. "Linda, you're both sentimental fools in your own way. David thinks the workers are his salvation. Richard thinks fear is his leash. But both of you underestimate the truth. Power isn't in loyalty or fear. Power is in perception. and perception is mine to craft. She held up her phone, the glow of an open recording app visible. Everything you say tonight could end up public, or buried. I decide which. David, then decide, right now. The world is ready for the truth. Linda, the world is ready for a story. Truth is messy. Truth doesn't sell. But heroes and villains? That people consume. Richard smirked. And you'd paint yourself a hero, wouldn't you, Linda? Linda's eyes narrowed. No, I paint myself a survivor. David stepped forward, rain dripping from his hair, voice low but steady. You both talk like survival is winning. But neither of you has stood in those diners at 2 a.m, watching a mother cry because she can't pay rent. Neither of you has watched cooks hide burns because medical bills would drown them. You call this survival? No, that's theft. That's cowardice. For the first time, Richard's grin faltered. Just slightly. David turned to Linda. And you, survivor? Survivors don't betray everyone who trusts them. Survivors fight. Survivors endure. What you do isn't survival. It's rut. The wind roared louder, whipping through steel beams like a warning drum. Linda's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression cracked. For the first time, uncertainty. Richard noticed. What is it? She hesitated, then lowered the phone, her voice calm but tight. The board split wider than we thought. Half are moving against you, Richard. The other half against me. David frowned. What do you mean, against you? Linda's smirk returned, but thinner now. Seems I played both sides too well. Nobody trusts me anymore. Which means tonight. She slipped the phone into her coat. I need a new alliance. Her gaze shifted between Richard and David like a predator choosing prey. Richard stepped closer, his men's guns glinting. Then make your choice, Linda. Side with me, and we'll erase David tonight. Side with him, and you'll be buried with him. Linda tilted her head, calculating. David's voice cut in, calm but raw. Or side with the people who actually built this company, the ones you've both used. You want survival? The only way any of us survive is if the truth wins. Not you, not Richard, the truth. The three of them stood, the city wind screaming around them, rain hammering steel. For a heartbeat, none moved. Words, not weapons, filled the silence. And then Linda laughed softly. The truth, she murmured. Funny thing about the truth, David, it doesn't set you free. It just decides who burns. A sudden gust slammed scaffolding against the beams, metal shrieking like thunder. The guards raised their weapons instinctively. Linda slipped a flash drive from her coat, different from David's, identical in shape. She held it up, its metallic glint catching the lightning. This, she whispered, is my insurance. Records, deals, names. If I fall, the whole company burns. Richard's face hardened. David's fist clenched. For the first time all night, all three realized the same thing. No one would leave the skyscraper without blood on their hands, or history at their back. In the war between greed, truth, and survival, there are no clean victories, only choices that scar. Tonight, three leaders stand at the edge of an empire built on exploitation. Only one question remains. When the dust settles, who will you believe? The builder, the thief, or the survivor?